You think other people hurt you. That's the lie you've been telling yourself. Your ex didn't hurt you. Your friend didn't betray you. Your family didn't break you. You did. Not because you're weak. Not because you're broken. But because you've been operating with a fatal flaw in your psychology that you didn't even know existed. And that flaw? It's been giving everyone around you permission to wound you, over and over and over. And here's the part that's going to sting. They didn't even have to try. You made it easy. You said yes when you meant no. You stayed when you should have left. You explained yourself to people who didn't deserve your words. You gave chances to those who never earned them. And every single time you did that, you weren't being kind. You were teaching them that hurting you has no consequences. But here's what they don't tell you. Here's what no therapist, no self-help book, no motivational speaker will ever say out loud because it's too uncomfortable, too raw, too brutally true. You're not a victim of bad people. You're a volunteer. And the moment you understand why you keep volunteering for pain, everything changes. Because once you see the mechanism, once you understand the psychology behind why you're so easy to hurt, you can dismantle it forever. 5 centuries ago, a man named Niccolo Machiavelli sat in exile and decoded this exact pattern. He watched rulers fall. He watched good people get destroyed. And he discovered something devastating. The people who get hurt the most aren't the weakest. They're the ones with the most invisible self-betrayal. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what he found. The psychological traps that make you an easy target. The invisible patterns that turn your kindness into a weapon used against you. And most importantly, the exact steps to end this cycle. Not temporarily. Not partially. Forever. Because you're not here to learn how to survive being hurt. You're here to learn how to become someone who can't be hurt in the first place. And that starts with a truth you're not ready for. Let's begin. Florence, Italy. Niccolo Machiavelli has lost everything. His career, his reputation, his safety. He's been tortured, exiled, and abandoned by the very people he served. And in that darkness, something remarkable happens. He starts watching. Not the kings, not the conquerors, but the patterns, the invisible mechanisms that determine who rises and who falls, who gets destroyed and who stays untouchable. And what he discovers changes everything. See, most people think Machiavelli wrote about power. They think The Prince is a manual for manipulation, for ruthlessness, for winning at any cost. They're wrong. Machiavelli was writing about self-preservation. He was documenting the fatal flaws that good people carry, the psychological blind spots that turn kindness into vulnerability, the invisible ways we hurt ourselves while blaming everyone else. And here's what he found. The people who get hurt the most aren't unlucky. They're predictable. They follow patterns. They repeat behaviors. They send signals without realizing it. Signals that say, I'm safe to hurt, I won't leave, I won't fight back, I'll forgive you before you even apologize. And once those signals are out there, once people recognize the pattern, you become a target. Not because you're weak, but because you're consistent in your self-betrayal. Machiavelli wrote, men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that he who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Read that again. Those who allow themselves to be deceived. He wasn't blaming the deceivers. He was pointing at the volunteers, at the people who, through their own behavior, make deception possible. And if you've been hurt repeatedly, if the same patterns keep showing up with different people, you're one of the volunteers. But here's the good news. Once you understand why you're so easy to hurt, once Machiavelli reveals the exact psychological traps you keep falling into, you can dismantle them, one by one, permanently. So let's stop pretending this is about other people. Let's stop blaming bad luck, bad timing, bad friends. Let's talk about why you keep getting hurt. The real reasons, the ones you've been avoiding. Because Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to judge you. He wrote it to save you from yourself. And that starts with 3 painful truths. Painful truth 1. You negotiate your own boundaries. Here's the first pattern Machiavelli identified in those who get hurt repeatedly. They set a boundary, and then they negotiate it. Someone crosses a line. You tell them, "Don't do that again." You say, "Okay, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I didn't communicate clearly enough." And just like that, you've negotiated your own boundary down to nothing. Let me show you how this works psychologically. Every time you set a boundary and then allow someone to talk you out of it, you're not being understanding. You're teaching them that your boundaries are starting points for negotiation, not endpoints for respect. You say, "I need you to stop calling me after 10 p.m. They say, "But it was an emergency." Or, "I just needed to talk." Or, "You're the only one who understands." And you cave. You say, "Okay, just this once." But here's what just happened. You didn't enforce a boundary. You revealed that your boundaries have exceptions. And once someone knows there are exceptions, they'll create emergencies. They'll engineer situations that fit the loophole, because they've learned that your no is actually a maybe if you push hard enough. Machiavelli watched this pattern destroy princes and kingdoms. He wrote, "He who is always flexible will always be bent." He saw that rulers who negotiated their own laws invited chaos, not because they were weak, but because they taught their subjects that the rules weren't real. And you're doing the same thing. Every time you say, "Well, I guess this time is different," you're announcing to the world that your boundaries are performative. They're suggestions. They're guidelines. But they're not real. And here's the cruelest part. The people who respect you will never push your boundaries. They'll see the line and they'll stay behind it. But the people who hurt you, they're testing constantly. They're looking for the flex. And the moment they find it, the moment you negotiate with them, they know. They know you're an easy mark. Not because you're kind, but because you're inconsistent. So, why do you keep getting hurt? Because you keep teaching people that hurting you is negotiable. Painful truth. 2. You reward bad behavior. Now here's the second pattern. And this one is going to sting. Someone hurts you. And then you stay. You stay and you explain. You stay and you try to make them understand. You stay and you give them the roadmap to hurt you better next time. But here's what you're not seeing. By staying, you just rewarded them. Let me break down the psychology. When someone does something harmful, and you remain present, available, and invested, you've just sent a signal. That signal says, "What you did wasn't bad enough to lose me." You think you're setting boundaries by explaining how they hurt you, but what you're actually doing is showing them the exact pain threshold you'll tolerate before you leave. And once they know that threshold, they'll operate right beneath it, forever. Think about it. Every time you've been hurt and stayed, what happened next? They apologized just enough. They changed just enough. They gave you just enough hope to stay. And then, weeks or months later, they did it again. Maybe slightly differently. Maybe with a better excuse. But they did it again. Because you taught them they could. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He wrote, "Men are more ready to repay an injury than a benefit. Because gratitude is a burden and revenge, a pleasure." But I'd add this. Men only injure those who they know will stay. Because why would they risk losing someone who might actually leave? They wouldn't. They test you first. And when you stay after the first wound, they know. They know you'll stay after the second, and the third, and the 100th. You're not being compassionate by staying. You're being complicit in your own suffering. And here's the part you don't want to hear. Every person who's hurt you repeatedly learned how to do it from you. You were the teacher. Not through your words, but through your presence after the wound. Through your forgiveness before change. Through your hope that replaced your standards. You rewarded bad behavior with your loyalty. And they learned to keep behaving badly because the cost was zero. So why do you keep getting hurt? Because you've made hurting you consequence-free. Painful truth 3. You confuse explanation with protection. Here's the third fatal pattern Machiavelli identified. And it's the most insidious because it feels like wisdom. When someone hurts you, you explain. You sit them down. You articulate exactly how their actions affected you. You walk them through your feelings, your boundaries, your expectations. You think this is communication, you think this is healthy, but here's the truth. Every explanation is a blueprint. Let me show you what I mean. When you tell someone, when you ignored me in front of your friends, I felt invisible and disrespected. You think you're teaching them empathy, but what you're actually doing is handing them a weapon. Now they know. They know that ignoring you in public hits deep. They know that social humiliation is your weak spot. And here's the part that's hard to accept. If they wanted to respect that boundary, they wouldn't have crossed it in the first place. People know when they're hurting you. The wound isn't the mystery. Your reaction is. And when you explain your reaction in detail, when you map out your vulnerabilities, you're not protecting yourself. You're arming your enemy. Machiavelli wrote, "Never tell your enemy what truly harms you, for he will always strike there." And yet, you keep explaining. You keep believing that if they just understood, they'd stop. But understanding was never the issue. Choice was. They chose to hurt you, and your explanation didn't change their character. It just made them more efficient. Think about the last time you had a deep conversation with someone who hurt you. You laid it all out. You explained your triggers, your history, your pain. And what happened? Maybe they changed for a week, maybe a month, but eventually, they hurt you again. And this time, it was more precise, more targeted, because you gave them the map. Here's the psychological trap. You believe that transparency equals intimacy. That showing someone your wounds will inspire them to protect you. But Machiavelli knew better. He knew that vulnerability without discernment is just exposure. Not everyone deserves to know where you're soft. Not everyone has earned the right to your internal world. And when you explain yourself to someone who's already proven they don't respect you, you're not building trust. You're donating ammunition. So why do you keep getting hurt? Because you keep explaining yourself to people who already understood. They just didn't care. Painful truth 4. You stay because you're afraid of your own anger. And now, the final pattern. The deepest one. The one that underlies all the others. You stay in situations that hurt you because you're more afraid of your own anger than you are of their behavior. Let me explain. Anger is information. It's your system telling you, this is wrong. This is unacceptable. This needs to stop. But somewhere along the way, you learned that anger is bad. That it makes you difficult, dramatic, unreasonable. So, you suppress it. You rationalize. You explain away your own rage. And in doing so, you betray yourself. Because here's what happens when you refuse to honor your anger. You can't leave. Leaving requires conviction. It requires certainty that you deserve better. And if you've talked yourself out of your anger, if you've convinced yourself that maybe you're overreacting, maybe they didn't mean it, maybe you're too sensitive, then you can't access the power to walk away. So you stay. Not because you want to, but because you've disarmed yourself. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves." You've been trying to be the fox. Clever, strategic, avoiding conflict. But you forgot to be the lion. The part of you that roars. The part that says, this ends now. And without your lion, you're defenseless. Not against them. Against yourself. Because the real trap isn't their behavior. It's your tolerance of it. Think about the last time you stayed too long. Why didn't you leave sooner? Was it because you didn't know it was wrong? No, you knew. You felt it in your chest, in your gut, in the sleepless nights. But you didn't trust that feeling. You didn't trust your anger. Instead, you trusted their apology. You trusted their potential. You trusted the version of them that didn't exist yet. And in doing so, you abandoned yourself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every day you stay in a situation that disrespects you, you're choosing them over you. And the reason you keep getting hurt isn't because they're bad people. It's because you've made it clear that hurting you doesn't cost them your presence. Your anger is trying to protect you, but you keep negotiating with it. You keep asking it to be quiet, to be reasonable, to wait a little longer, and it does. Until one day, it doesn't. Until one day, the anger you've been suppressing becomes bitterness, resentment, a quiet hatred that poisons everything. Machiavelli saw this destroy people from the inside. Good people who stayed too long, who gave too many chances, who suffocated their rage until it turned inward. So why do you keep getting hurt? Because you're afraid of what you'd have to do if you honored your anger. You're afraid you'd have to leave. You're afraid you'd have to be alone. You're afraid you'd have to admit you were wrong about them. And that fear? But here's what Machiavelli would tell you. Your anger isn't the problem. Your fear of it is. So now you know why. You know the patterns. You know how you've been volunteering for pain. And if you're still here, if you haven't closed this video in defense of anger, you're ready for the how. Because understanding why you're hurt is useless without knowing how to stop it. So let's dismantle these patterns, one by one, permanently. Method 1. Stop explaining. Start disappearing. Here's the first antidote. And it's going to feel wrong at first, because you've been conditioned to believe that silence is passive-aggressive, that it's immature, that real adults communicate. But here's what Machiavelli understood. Explanation is surrender. Every time you explain why someone's behavior hurt you, you're doing three things. You're validating that their opinion of the situation matters. You're giving them data to use against you later. And you're wasting energy on someone who's already shown they don't value your peace. So, here's what you do instead. When someone crosses a boundary, when they hurt you, when they disrespect you, you don't explain. You vanish. Not dramatically, not with a door slam or a final speech. You just become progressively less available. Your texts take longer. Your calls go to voicemail. Your presence becomes optional, and when they ask what's wrong, because they will, you give them nothing to work with. I'm good, just busy. That's it. 2 sentences. No elaboration. No invitation to negotiate. Here's the psychology behind why this works. Manipulators need your reaction to calibrate. They need to know if they've gone too far. They need feedback. And when you deny them that feedback, when you refuse to engage in the post-wound conversation, you remove their ability to adjust. They're flying blind. And more importantly, you stop teaching them about your vulnerabilities. You stop giving them the map. Instead, you let your absence do the talking. And absence is a language they can't argue with. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to act and repent than to not act and regret." But I'd reframe it. It's better to leave in silence than to stay and explain why you should have mattered. So, the first method is simple. Stop making your case. Stop defending your worth. Stop explaining your boundaries. Just enforce them through distance. Quietly. Consistently. Irreversibly. Because people who deserve you will never make you explain why they shouldn't hurt you. And people who don't deserve you, they don't get the privilege of your explanations anymore. Method 2. Let your absence speak. Now, the second method builds on the first. Because disappearing isn't enough if you're doing it as punishment. If you're pulling back, hoping they'll notice, hoping they'll chase, hoping they'll finally understand what they lost, you're still operating from the same broken place. So, here's the shift. You don't leave to teach them a lesson. You leave to honor yourself. Let me show you the difference. Leaving is punishment. I'm going to disappear, so they realize how much they need me. Leaving is self-honor. I'm redirecting my energy toward people and things that actually value it. See the difference? One is still about them. The other is about you. Machiavelli understood this distinction. He wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." In other words, your associations reveal your standards. And when you stay associated with people who hurt you, you're announcing that your standards are negotiable. So here's the method. When someone proves through repeated behavior that they don't respect you, you don't make an announcement. You don't send the breakup text. You don't deliver the friendship-ending speech. You just quietly reallocate your investment. You stop initiating. You stop being available at their convenience. You stop showing up to things you don't want to attend. You stop carrying the relationship. And here's what happens. One of two things. Either they notice your absence and they step up. They start initiating. They start putting in effort. They prove through action, not words, that they want to keep you. And if that happens, you've successfully reset the dynamic without a single confrontation. Or they don't notice. They don't reach out. They don't adjust. And that tells you everything you need to know. They were never attached to you. They were attached to your availability. And now that you're not available, they've moved on. Both outcomes are wins, because either they rise to your standard, or they eliminate themselves from your life. And you didn't have to do the messy work of cutting them off. You just stopped doing the work of holding them close. Machiavelli knew that the most powerful exits are the ones that don't need to be explained. Because when you leave without justification, without debate, without giving them ammunition to use against you, you leave them with nothing but the reality of your absence. And that reality? It speaks louder than any argument ever could. So, let your absence be the message. Not as manipulation, but as self-preservation. Because you're not playing games, you're just refusing to invest in people who've proven they don't value the investment. Method 3. Honor your anger as intelligence. Now, the third method. And this one is crucial because it addresses the root cause of why you stay too long. You've been taught that anger is bad, that it's destructive, immature, something to manage and suppress. But here's what Machiavelli knew. Anger is data. It's your internal alarm system. It's the part of you that recognizes injustice, disrespect, violation. And when you suppress it, when you talk yourself out of it, when you tell yourself you're being too sensitive, you're not being mature. You're being self-destructive. So here's the method. Start treating your anger like intelligence. When you feel that surge, that heat, that voice that says, "This isn't okay," don't negotiate with it. Don't rationalize it away. Don't wait for more evidence. Trust it. Your anger isn't asking you to blow up. It's not asking you to yell or confront or send the midnight text. It's asking you to protect yourself. And protection, in most cases, looks like removal. Let me give you the framework. When someone does something that triggers your anger, ask yourself, if a stranger did this to my best friend, would I tell them to stay? If the answer is no, then you have your answer. Your anger is valid. It's intelligent. And it's telling you to leave. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince ought to have no other aim or thought than war and its rules and discipline." For you, that translates to, your only loyalty should be to your own protection, not to preserving relationships that cost you your peace, not to being liked, to staying whole. So, here's what honoring your anger looks like in practice. You feel disrespected, your body tenses, your chest tightens, and instead of thinking, maybe I'm overreacting, you think, my system is telling me this isn't safe. And then you act on that information, not with rage, not with confrontation, but with distance, with boundary, with the quiet conviction that says, I don't need to convince anyone that I deserve better. I just need to act like I do. Because here's the truth. Your anger has been right every single time. Every time you suppressed it and stayed, what happened? More pain, more disrespect, more proof that your instinct was correct. So stop betraying your anger. Stop treating it like it's the problem. It's not. It's the solution. And the moment you start honoring it as intelligence instead of dysfunction, you stop volunteering for situations that hurt you. Machiavelli knew that rulers who ignored their instincts lost their kingdoms, and you're losing yourself every time you ignore yours. So trust the anger, not to destroy, but to protect, because it's the only part of you that's been honest this whole time. Method 4. Become expensive to hurt. And now, the final method. The one that ties everything together. You've stopped explaining. You've let your absence speak. You've honored your anger. Now, you make the final shift. You become expensive to hurt. Here's what that means. Right now, hurting you is cheap. Someone disrespects you, and what do they lose? Nothing. You stay. You forgive. You give them another chance. The cost of hurting you is zero. Maybe they have to apologize. Maybe they have to promise to change, but they don't actually lose access to you. So, there's no incentive to stop. But when you become expensive to hurt, everything changes. Because now, hurting you costs them something real. It costs them your presence, your energy, your investment. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are less hesitant to harm someone who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared." Not because fear is better than love, but because fear carries consequences. Love without consequences? That's just permission. So here's the method. You raise your price, not through words, not by telling people, "If you do this again, I'm gone." That's still negotiating. Instead, you demonstrate through action that access to you is conditional on respect. Someone hurts you once, your availability decreases by 50%. They notice the shift, but you don't explain it. You just become harder to reach. They do it again? You decrease another 50%. Now, they're getting 25% of your previous energy. And still, no explanation. Just a quiet, consistent recalibration of what they're worth to you. And here's the power of this method. You're not cutting anyone off. You're not burning bridges. You're just making it clear through your behavior that your presence is tied to their treatment. And if their treatment is poor, your presence diminishes. This is how you become expensive to hurt, not through threats, not through ultimatums, but through a simple, elegant equation. Respect equals access. Disrespect equals distance. And when people realize that hurting you actually costs them something, one of two things happens. Either they adjust their behavior because they value you enough to keep you, or they don't, and they drift away on their own. Both outcomes protect you, because either you've trained them to treat you better, or you've filtered them out without drama. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about domination, it's about value. And when you make yourself valuable, when you make access to you something that must be earned and maintained, you stop being an easy target. You're not playing games. You're not manipulating. You're just operating with the self-respect that says, "If you want me in your life, my peace is the price of admission. And if you can't afford that price, you can't afford me." So, become expensive, not through ego, but through standards. Because the moment you start charging for your presence with the currency of respect, only those who can afford you will stay. And those are the only ones worth keeping anyway. So what happens when you actually do this? What happens when you stop negotiating, stop explaining, start honoring your anger, and become expensive to hurt? Let me show you the transformation. Before, you were exhausted. Every relationship felt like work. You were constantly managing other people's emotions, explaining yourself, justifying your boundaries, trying to make people understand why they should treat you with basic respect. Now, you're at peace, not because everyone around you changed, but because you stopped auditioning for people who should have valued you automatically. You stopped carrying relationships that were never yours to carry. And the energy you were pouring into the wrong people, you redirected it into yourself. Before, you were confused. You'd get hurt, and you'd spend days, weeks, months, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You'd replay conversations. You'd analyze their behavior. You'd wonder if you were too sensitive, too demanding, too much. Now, you're clear. You understand that their behavior was never about your worth. It was about their character. And you don't need to understand why they hurt you. You just need to understand that they did. And that's enough to act. Before, you were available to everyone. Your time, your energy, your presence, they were assumed. People knew you'd pick up the phone. You'd respond to the text. You'd show up when they needed you, even when they didn't show up for you. Now, you're selective. Your presence has become a privilege, not a given. And the people in your life feel it. They feel the shift. The ones who deserve you rise to meet it. The ones who don't, they complain about how you've changed. And that complaint, that's confirmation you're doing it right. Before, you tolerated disrespect because you were afraid of being alone. You stayed in friendships that drained you. You kept people around who made you feel small because the alternative solitude felt like failure. Now, you've realized something Machiavelli knew 5 centuries ago. Solitude isn't the punishment. Tolerating disrespect is. And being alone with your peace is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who make you feel lonely anyway. Here's what this looks like in real life. That friend who only called when they needed something? They call now, and you don't answer. Not out of spite, but because you're genuinely busy building a life that doesn't revolve around being useful to people who were never available to you. That family member who guilt-tripped you into compliance? They try the same tactic now, and it slides off you. You've stopped absorbing their manipulation. You've become the mirror, and when their guilt finds no traction, they move on to someone else. That ex who kept coming back with just enough affection to keep you hooked, they try to return now, and there's nothing to return to. You've already reallocated that space in your life. Not with someone new, but with your own dignity. You're not cold. You're not heartless. You're just no longer participating in dynamics where your pain is the price of admission. And here's the most unexpected transformation. You've stopped attracting the same type of people because the energy you're putting out has changed. You used to broadcast, "I'm kind, I'm understanding, I'll give you endless chances." And that attracted users. Now you broadcast, "I'm kind, but I'm not available for disrespect." And that attracts quality. People who don't need to be taught how to value you. People who see your boundaries and respect them without negotiation. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to make you ruthless. He wrote it to make you whole. And wholeness doesn't come from getting everyone to treat you right. It comes from removing everyone who won't. So, you're not trying to change people anymore. You're just changing your proximity to them. And that one shift, that's everything. You're not waiting to stop being hurt. You've already stopped. Not because the world got kinder, but because you stopped volunteering for pain. And that's freedom. So here we are. You came into this video believing other people were the problem. That you just kept choosing the wrong people. That you were unlucky in love, in friendship, in family. And now you know the truth. It was never about them. It was about the patterns you were running, the boundaries you negotiated, the bad behavior you rewarded, the explanations you gave to people who didn't deserve your words, the anger you suppressed until it turned into acceptance. You weren't a victim of bad people, you were volunteering for pain. And Machiavelli didn't reveal this to shame you. He revealed it to free you, because once you see the mechanism, once you understand why you've been so easy to hurt, you can dismantle it. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through quiet, strategic removal. You stop explaining. You let your absence speak. You honor your anger as the intelligence it's always been. And you become expensive to hurt, so expensive that only people who genuinely value you can afford to stay. And here's what happens next. The people who were using you, they'll drift away. They'll call you cold, distant, changed, and they're right. You have changed. You've stopped being available for disrespect. And to someone who benefited from your old patterns, that feels like betrayal. Let them feel that way. Their opinion of your boundaries is none of your business. But the people who actually love you, they'll rise to meet this version of you. They'll respect the distance. They'll honor the shift, because they never wanted to hurt you in the first place. They just needed to know where the line was. And now they do. So here's your challenge. I want you to pick one person. Someone you've been explaining yourself to. Someone you've stayed too long for. And starting today, I want you to apply what Machiavelli revealed. Don't announce it. Don't send the message. Don't give them the speech. Just start becoming strategically unavailable. Watch how they respond when you stop being predictable. Watch how they adjust when your presence is no longer guaranteed. And, most importantly, watch how you feel when you stop betraying yourself. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about making them suffer. This is about remembering that your peace is more valuable than their presence, and acting like it. Now, if you made it this far, if you actually understand what Machiavelli was trying to save you from, if you recognize yourself in these patterns and you're ready to stop volunteering for pain, I want to know. Comment the word expensive below. Just that one word. Because I want to see who's really listening. I want to know who's ready to raise their price. Who's ready to make access to them something that must be earned, not assumed. And if you know someone who needs this, someone who keeps getting hurt by the same type of people, someone who's kind to the point of self-destruction, send them this video. Not to judge them, but to show them the exit. Because 500 years ago, Machiavelli sat in exile and wrote a survival guide for the destroyed. And what he discovered still works today. Not because human nature has changed, but because it hasn't. People will hurt you if you let them. They'll take and take and take until you finally stop giving. And the moment you stop, the moment you honor yourself enough to walk away from anyone who makes you feel small, that's not when you lose people. That's when you find yourself. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to make you ruthless. He wrote it to remind you that self-preservation isn't selfish, it's sacred. So stop explaining yourself to people who should have understood. Stop staying in places that cost you your peace. Stop negotiating with your own anger. Just become expensive, and watch how quickly the wrong people can't afford you anymore. Welcome to the end of volunteering. Welcome to the beginning of valuing yourself. Welcome to expensive.
You are still here. Good. It means you have the patience of a hunter. I do not serve the algorithm. I serve those who seek power. Tell me in the comments. What is your biggest obstacle right now? I read everything, but I only reply to the worthy. Now,